one of the things that I think we're really dancing around here is we're talking about leadership at all levels, right? And I think there's some workplaces that would say that is, there's leaders and there's managers and there's ICs. But what we're really talking about is leadership at all levels.
I've been trying to reframe this name of IC. I think we should stop calling them individual contributors, because I think most people now will be individual contributors because you can do so much more on your own. I think we should be calling them impact contributors.
This could buy you some free time to actually think creatively, because I'm a really big fan of setting time aside to really be creative about where we are and what we want to build. And I think that the time for creativity in a lot of businesses these days is pretty lost.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry. This is a show about creating cultures of learning inside companies. So what happens when AI turns every individual contributor into an impact multiplier? In this episode, I'm joined by Becky Karsh, the VP of Talent and Growth at F5, who is here to help me rethink IC development for the AI era. We dig into the shift from tasks to outcomes, why work design is the new power skill, and how ICs must master negotiation, delegation, feedback, and crisp communication, just like great managers. We also explore practical use cases like how to spot automations and why domain expertise still matters. We get real about scale and measurement, raising the floor for everyone while raising the ceiling for top talent, tying programs to OKRs, and a clever twist, having participants bring their own OKRs to operationalize. Plus, you'll hear about T-shaped careers, building networks that accelerate execution, and a return to fundamentals, or as Becky says, going slow to go fast. If you're leading L&D, managing ICs, or you are one, this is your playbook for thriving alongside AI. Sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Becky Karsh. Becky, welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrew. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited. We met in New York City. Actually, we went for a walk together and started a conversation that we've picked up a few times since. And I'm excited to record that now and sort of flesh out a little bit of what we've been speaking about. You've recently changed roles, and we can get into that. I'm excited welcome to the show first, by the way.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about these things. So I'm excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, cool. So I want to set the scene for folks, like basically get them up to speed with what you and I started talking about, which is what you've kind of recognized as something that you're going to need to solve pretty soon. Maybe it's not at the inflection point right now for this, but it's the impact that AI is having on the role of the individual contributor specifically. And we can get into managers a little bit as well, but it's obviously a role to play. But I want to zero in on this population. When I mentioned this to you, you got really interested and you were like, yes, this does sound like something we need to think about. And you started to raise some very good questions around it. So I want to unpack all of that. So what is the need you think that's coming?
Yeah, it was interesting because when we were originally talking, IC development wasn't something that was top of my list, right? We often think about investing in leaders, investing in managers, that multiplier effect, and managers and leaders being able to train and develop their ICs. But as I kind of get deeper and deeper into the world of AI and hopefully the potential future we're looking at, where we can just scale more effectively, move quicker, there are a lot of different requirements that are going to be placed on individual contributors. I was talking to somebody who has AI expertise, and he said something really interesting to me about, in the future, are you going to hire that person with that that, deep skill set and the ability to do XYZ, or are you going to hire somebody who can build agents to do that and manage multiple agents? And so I think it'll be a combination of both. I'm not like an AI doomsdayist. I don't think it's going to replace all of our jobs. But I do think that it has this great ability to enhance and have us do things that we didn't think we were capable of. And so I do think in the future, it looks a little bit different. It looks like more individual contributors who can build out these agents and then manage multiple agents at once. And what I mean by that is the ability to think about what is the work that needs to get done? How do we design that work, right? How do we think through end to end? How do we delegate that work? Those are typically management and leadership skills that we weren't developing in ICs because yes, you need to learn those, but those you can learn on the job. But now we're saying, okay, you IC individual contributor, you need to be managing multiple agents and you need to be able to very clearly tell those agents the type of work that needs to get done and sometimes how to cross work with each other and how to think about what is, we have a goal to work towards, right? This is a typical manager leadership skill. We have this end result we're looking at. Here's our KPIs, here's our metrics. And then how do we build towards that? How do we design towards that? And that I think will become more and more of an IC level skill. So I'm excited about the future. I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for human and AI interaction and partnership. But I do think that the typical skills we expect from individual contributors, which is the doing, a lot of that is going to be handed off to those AIs. And so we're going to need, individual contributors who can really think about designing that work differently.
Yeah. I think there's also, you've alluded to an important point here that we're not talking about someone who's brand new in a job. Like we're just going to hire some kid who knows how to use AI and they're going to know how to run, product marketing function for us or whatever the case is. We're talking about someone like you still have to know the job, right? You still have to know the work to be able to design the work and then incorporate AI. So it's an interesting, like we're talking about slightly more experienced people who know enough about the thing to be able to then step back and design the thing and kind of break it down, right? So like, I'm just curious if you have a thought on that, especially when it comes to hiring as well, because it's hard to find, it really sounds like it's more of a training development thing than it is a hiring thing, at least initially.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm trying to think through every step of the way. How can AI enhance? How can AI work? How can I work with AI to build something that is easier for employees to use, more effective for employees to use, helps me move faster? What does that look like? And we do need folks in business. I mean, this is the transformation. And we were talking a little bit about, we're not quite there yet. There's a road ahead of us in terms of an AI enablement, making sure that it's our first thought, right? It's our first thought of how do I use AI in order to be more effective in my role or support the business more effectively or do my job better. And so once we get to that inflection point, it will be folks who have that experience and have done the job and are able to build things that are doing things that they were typically doing in order to allow time for leveling up. Something that I had told my team in my last role was, this could buy you some free time to actually think creatively, because I'm a really big fan of setting time aside to really be creative about where we are and what we want to build. And I think that the time for creativity in a lot of businesses these days is pretty lost just through meetings and complications. So I do think we also need to get past that preconceived notion that AI is a sort of cheating, right? Like, oh, I'm letting it write for me, or I'm letting it, or I'm brainstorming with it, or I'm building an agent that would typically do something that I would do. I think of these as enhancements and opportunities. And so when I think about the up leveling of skills, you're taking somebody who might be an individual contributor. I'll take your example, and I think you said product marketing or product management. But you take an individual contributor who is working in that organization, and now all of a sudden they can manage their projects better. They can actually think more creatively. They are thinking through, what does this end-to-end design work look like, and what can I automate, and what can I do to help me just work more effectively, have more of that creative time. have more space in my day to really work in the effective way that I need to. So I do think there's a lot of enhancements ahead.
Yeah. And if you're looking, you mentioned like you have had discussions with your team about this. So your team previously at Snapchat, your new team, as you think about building that out as well, what other things would you be telling them, or have you told them they should be thinking about in terms of skills that they need to be developing? I think creativity is a really good example, but what else comes to mind?
I somebody said this to me, and I say this to everybody, especially my teams, is if you do something more than once, that should be an agent, right? You need to be developing the baseline in terms of the hard skill is how are you building and working with AI? And then that kind of more difficult to measure, kind of developed on the job skill that we probably need to kind of um, uh, juice up a little bit and give a little bit more life to for individual contributors and provide more resources around is just this idea of I'm no longer assigned a task. I'm now assigned an end goal, right? And so it really is that creative, how are we getting there? And what are the things that I can work with? What are the tools that I can work with? So it is thinking about that design of work. And I do think delegation is this really interesting skill that I see leaders be not great at delegation, right? So you can see this in your job with the folks you work with. And some people are just really great at it, and they understand that it is not their job to do the work, right? It is their job to assign the work. And of course, we're now all player coaches in the modern world that we live in. So we also have work of our own, but it's like, how do you not get too far into the weeds? That is scalable, right? We're talking about scale. It's the same thing with AI agents. We're talking about scale. So we're talking about building for a future where we can scale more effectively, we can move quicker, and it's not a loss of jobs, and it's not a loss of like leveling, because we'll still need to, train folks, and people will need to learn on the job. But it is this new skill set of, how do you get from point A to point B and do that really well, and make sure that you're not that you're working smarter and harder, right? Like you're not just, working harder for the sake of working harder.
Yeah, I think you actually make a really interesting point here. This idea of switching from I'm given a task to I'm given an outcome, and and I'm now accountable and sort of have agency over that outcome, which shifts. And I think you said this now as well, that it sort of makes the skill set of an IC very similar to the skill set of a manager, right? Like you mentioned delegation, and that's we've all been taught the traditional ways of delegating to a human, and it's almost exactly the same for an AI. Like you have to really explain the objective, you have to give examples of what good looks like, like all of these kind of things. I think another one that comes to mind is feedback. Like all managers get taught how to give feedback, and you have to know how to give feedback to be able to work well with AI.
Absolutely.
So let's like brainstorm a little bit more on that. If ICs need to think of themselves more as managers, what other skills come to mind as really useful for them?
I mean, the feedback piece is interesting because you really need to get super clear. So communication's big one, right? You're writing prompts, right? So you need to get super clear on what you're asking something to do, this AI to do, or others to do, right? Because there will still be teams, there will still be partnership, right? You're talking about product manager, product marketer, right? Those are two teams that need to be working together. And so it really is super clear communication. I think that's just a fundamental skill in general, but getting really clear on what you are asking for, right? Feedback is an interesting one because if you think about feedback is just one that everyone should be good at. I think it's just a core skill because peer-to-peer feedback can just make you so much faster. But if you're also good at feedback, you're also good at kind of saying, okay, this thing didn't work for me. And, I built this task and now it's not working. So I need to understand what I said that wasn't working for it and redo, right? It's a different type of feedback. But it still is in that same vein. But I mean, I do think there will still be, like I said, I'm not kind of doomsday AI is going to replace all. I still think there's going to be people skills needed, right? Peer-to-peer work set. How are we working collaboratively together? How am I making sure that we are getting to the best idea and able to execute, and that we talk about T-shaped skills a lot of, like, kind of that top of the T, right? A lot of ICs typically have that I part of the T. Yeah, like that's what they're developing, is their deep skill set in their individual area. But that top level, that leadership level, really being able to look across and how do we collaborate, that'll be a big one. And so I can imagine worlds where you're learning how to kind of work with various individuals from different teams to support a project.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this idea of the T shape professionally, because and it sort of tracks back to what we were saying earlier. Like an IC needs to gain experience to build the sort of base of that T or the I part, and then what we're talking about now is basically developing ICs to get that breadth, right, of the T at the top. And so I want to go in on this point of like relationships and networking a little bit, because I think this is also so important. And I see the highest performing ICs, account executives, reps, whatever, that, the individual contributors that I've worked with are the ones that have the best network. They're like well connected to people. And I'm curious, you actually, I think you shared something when you were working at Snapchat about something that you did well there. And maybe that's the example you want to use. Maybe you have another one, but how do you encourage relationship building and networking?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were talking about Snapchat, but I do think that in the modern tech world that we live in, I mean, relationships are just a key to getting anything done, right? And so knowing who to go to, who's the decision maker, how to partner, how to understand their business, right? It's not just coming from a one-sided perspective. I think that makes for bad partnership when you come in and you demand things or you ask for things without understanding what's on their plate. And so really building those strong networks. I mean, there's so many benefits to having strong networks. Research shows that if you have a strong, close network in a workplace, you're more likely to be a higher performer. You're more likely to stay for longer. You're more likely to find more enjoyment and fulfillment in your work. So networking within the workplace is huge. And I think that pre-pandemic, it was such a huge part of workplace culture, right? And then it kind of fell apart. And it's interesting, I'm onboarding to a new role remotely. And this is my number one focus, is meeting everybody and building relationships and starting to build a baseline of trust, because I do think that this is like, it's human capital, right? It's like you're really trying to understand how things get done and who's responsible for what, and making sure that you have the right folks in the room for the right decisions and all of that. So that type of workplace savvy is going to be huge. And one of the things that I think we're really dancing around here is we're talking about leadership at all levels, right? And I think there's some workplaces that would say that is, there's leaders and there's managers and there's ICs. But what we're really talking about is leadership at all levels. And I kind of a controversial take for me is that I don't think anyone can be a leader. I think that I do think that it takes a type of work that you want to put in. Like people, I think non-controversial, everyone would agree that leadership is earned and not given, right? So you become a leader because others want to follow you, right? But I think a lot of people still feel like it should be given for a title, for a place in the organization, for the work that you do, versus like actually working as a leader, working really hard as a leader, whether you're an IC, whether you're a manager, whether you're a leader. I do think leadership can exist at all levels, but I don't think anyone can be a leader. I think you need to be willing to put in the skill development and the hard work and understanding, like you said, the network, building your network, the T-shaped skills. There are so many leadership competencies that can be built at the individual contributor level. And I think just as our workplace evolves, these are the folks that will be successful, right? This is what we need more and more of, is the understanding of how the work gets done. And the AI is really an enhancement. It's there to help us do it faster and better and just in a more elevated way. And smarter, quite frankly. Sometimes AI can see things that, we can't. So I do think that you can be a leader at any level, but I do think that you need to be willing to put in the work, the hard work, to develop those skills that make you strong at that level.
And I would extend that, because I think it ties back to what you said. You're not saying it's about the effort and the input. It's still about the output. It's still about the impact you're making. You're just saying that you have to put in effort to get impact. And I agree with that a lot. And I think I've been trying to reframe this name of IC. I think we should stop calling them individual contributors, because I think most people now will be individual contributors, because you can do so much more on your own. I think we should be calling them impact contributors. And what you're saying is, like, leadership you're not born a leader, you are made a leader, right? I think you'll agree on that side. But to be made into a leader, it's not about tenure. It's not about sticking around long enough to get given the promotion. It's about actually making an impact. And you can do that right away.
Totally. You can show up as a leader any day, right? You can choose to show up differently. And I think that people who don't feel like they have that ability, or that they can't, they're like, oh, well, I'm just this, or I'm just that. I actually think that is kind of your own self-narrative, right? I think that anyone can kind of take it and say, you see this often in workplaces where folks do show up as leaders in their individual contributor roles, or their impact contributor roles, as you would say. But I do think that there are folks that show up, and those are the people who are successful, right? And like I said, anyone can, people, you can do this, right? You can learn the skills, but you need to be able to put in that work. And it's the same with using AI, right? There is going to be a shift in skill narrative and skills needed to work in this new workforce that we're talking about, right? So this future workplace. And I do think that showing up and being able to own the work and own the impact is right. I posted something on my LinkedIn the other day, which is what I really believe on leaders, which is, your team's success is their success, but your team's failure is your failure. And it goes the same with anyone at any level, right? It's like, how do you own that failure? How do you learn from it? How do you move on? And how do you celebrate the success of the organization, right? That knowledge, that thinking of group over individual is a major leadership hurdle for individual contributors. And once you get over that and you realize it's not about me, then you can start thinking much more expansively of like, okay, how do I work with my peer set to ensure that I am leveling up the business, right? It's about the impact. Rising tide raises all ships. So let's work together to make this thing work. So yeah, I think there's a lot of ownership in that. We don't do, I think, historically, a lot of IC development. And I think that there's several reasons for that, as I shared earlier, which is like there's, a big emphasis on trickle down and, get managers trained up and they can train their individuals. But I think to your point, I love a flat organization, right? I think you can move quicker. It's easier. I know someone at Block where they really flatten their orgs, and a manager would have, 20 individuals reporting into them. But the reason for that is to move quicker and faster. And then those individuals really need to become clear owners. Another clear leadership skill, managing up, right? How are you telling up and out what you're working on to ensure that there's continuity and shared responsibility for outcomes. So yeah, I think that there's so much opportunity here in development for the future.
I think those are some interesting perspectives on why we haven't done this before. And we've talked obviously about why we think it's going to start shifting. But there's still, when I brought this up to you, you still raised some very interesting questions, which I had to go back and think a lot about. And that was, one was scale and the other was measurement, right? So how do we get this to all ICs versus like maybe just high potential ICs? So let's start there and share your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I've always had a similar kind of thought in my L&D investments, which is when you kind of go more leadership level, you get something a little bit more high touch. Whereas for ICs, obviously there's a lot more ICs and you want to scale to the masses. So I try and do something a little bit more scalable, but still feel high touch, right? I'm a big fan of live virtual and getting a bunch of people in a room and having conversations. And so building, I also believe that one of the roles of learning and development in the workplace, especially we were just talking about building a network, is building relationships, right? Getting those strong relationships between folks in the business, maybe people they wouldn't normally meet, and how do you kind of foster that also through your programming? So yeah, so scale for individual contributors is always on my mind. And also, how do you leverage something like this to build relationships that could be super advantageous as folks grow? I also believe that you're investing in your future, right? In your future of your organization when you're investing in individual contributors. And one of the best signs of a great organization is you're a great exporter of talent. And I know people don't like to think like that, but when you say, oh, this person, I mean, I feel really proud to have come from early Uber. And I think people just know, oh, early Uber people are just really good, right? And I think I don't know if I am or not. I can't speak to that, but like I think that there's a reputation there. And so I do think being like losing out on the opportunity to invest in everyone in your organization is I think probably a missed opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Like, I think there's there's sort of two things you have to take care of. One is the floor and getting everyone up to a certain baseline level, and then I do think you have to be thinking of raising the ceiling with a smaller group of people, because ultimately, like, that's where you're going to find your best ideas, your biggest impact is from a few people, right? It's not going to be everyone doing everything, So it's a tricky balance, though, isn't it?
It is. I think that most organizations I've been a part of at this point are very interested in this idea of raising the bar through performance and talent management. And that is another side of my role is talent management. And I really do believe in understanding and assessing talent and supporting people to grow and making sure that they have the opportunities to learn and grow, but also understanding where are people sitting, right? Who are our higher performers, and how do we invest in those folks and make sure that they feel like they have the opportunities ahead of them? And we want to retain those folks. And then for the folks who are not quite there, can we develop them? Can we grow them? Or maybe this is not the right opportunity for them. So I do believe understanding talent is a big part. I think we were talking about this earlier, or maybe I was talking to somebody else about it earlier, but I do believe talent management, performance, succession, all of that stuff is two sides of the same coin with learning and development, right? It's about understanding the talent and then creating the opportunities that the business needs to be successful. And you talked about measurement, and like, for me, it is all about business results, right? And everything, the bottom line should be, how is this impacting the business? And if it is not, then it probably is not worth the time of the organization.
Yeah, and so that's a good way to end this off. I think I want to talk a little bit more about the measurement piece, because when I pitched this idea to you and then you built on it, and I want to just flesh that out for people. So I said to you, like, one of the ways we approach these programs is we identify OKRs in the business and try to then kind of reverse engineer the teams that are working on those. What skills are they going to need to be able to execute on that initiative, and then design really like just in time and embedded in the work initiatives of, introduce frameworks, whatever things they can use to then get better at that skill, which translates and we've had good success with that. But you brought up an interesting alternative, which I want you to unpack a bit, and that was, well, what if you get the participants to bring their own OKRs?
Yeah, I mean, I love I love the idea of the business level OKRs and bringing people together, but that's also kind of limiting, right? Then you're like, okay, we have these 20 people working on a project and we're going to do this work with them. Whereas you could scale it massively to have, 50 people to say, or more. I actually don't like programs if you're going to do kind of a program size more than 40, because that's where that's the threshold of connecting and meeting. But you could scale it feasibly unlimited to say, okay, you have your OKRs, you have your goals, bring them to this program, and we are going to teach you how to operationalize these goals, right? And we're going to teach you the skills that you need in order to be successful. And so they can do that on an individual level, and there can be a framework for them to think through. And then they bring that back to their teams, and they have this whole new way of thinking about, okay, my goal was to do X, Y, Z, and now I actually know how to action it. I know who, like the people in my network, we used to run at Snap a design thinking workshop with Stanford Design School with Bill Burnett, and there was this whole idea of like who in the network you need, right? And so you would build that actual visual network. And so, I mean, I can imagine when you're thinking about your OKRs, you're probably not thinking quite expansively about those folks, the fringe network even, that are going to be needed to be able to move this forward. And do they know this is your OKR? And do they know how you're operationalizing it? So there's so many skills in there, both like, I mean, I don't like to say soft skills anymore, but like, you know, these like hard tactical skills of how am I going to get this done and operationalize this, but also who do I need to bring along, right? How do I change manage this? How do I make sure that my leadership knows what I'm doing? And so I think that there are so many skills in there that can be learned as an individual versus worked through as a team and brought back to your work. And I like when I think about goal setting, I think there are people who are really great at it and really understand the rationale behind goal setting. And then I think there's folks who just create a checklist, which is not necessarily a goal.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to unpack this for folks because I think this is a really cool idea that you brought up, and I want to contrast it with mine. And I think they both, because yours to me feels like a meta program. So and I'll explain why. So in our programs, like when I say we look at what like a single OKR and then back into the behavior change, it's an example is like rolling out a new feature in a product. So one of the things you're going to need to do is talk to customers and conduct that customer discovery. So how can we get you better at that, right? And so we have a framework for interviewing, and so we teach that, and then people can apply it directly into that thing. And so it's like it's in the flow of the work. What you're talking about is actually really an interesting almost precursor to this. It's like helping the team do this on their own, basically, right? Like think through like, okay, what is your objective? What are you going to need from a team perspective, from a relationship perspective, from a skill perspective, which is the one part we're focusing on. And then I think you also said like bring in the AI agent piece into this. Now that you've mapped that all out, what can you automate? What's repetitive, right?
Yes.
And so and that's definitely a more scalable initial piece to get people kind of set up for success.
Yeah. I also think that I'm starting to come back to a lot of original principles of leadership and learning and growth and development, because I think we're like almost too heavy in the AI. I know I talk a lot about AI and I love it. But I still think that core principles of the workplace still remain true. Like I think that good leadership is good leadership is good leadership. And I don't think AI is going to change that at all. But I do think that there is still a set of skills that is needed when you are given this, how to create an OKR, right? How to think about the work and and this idea of going slow to go fast. We have lost this idea. We are like, okay, we have an idea. Let's go execute on it, right? Let's go do the work. And I love that like rapid iteration, but I do think that idea of let's be a little bit more planful. I mean, it is so, it doesn't take much time to actually plan through the work. And I don't think individuals at that level or a lot of levels, quite frankly, are really taking that time. So I can see this almost as an opportunity to take a pause at the beginning of something and really think through, what does this look like? What does good look like, right? How are we measuring results for this OKR? What are my KRs and how do I hit them? And then what are the milestones along the way? Who are the people? What is the AI tools that I need? What are the resources that I need? And who needs to be checked in with, and all of those kind of pieces of a work puzzle. Like we've lost a little bit of that along the way in an effort to move quickly. And I actually think the quickness should come from the AI and the new capabilities and the new technology, but not losing the essence of what makes good work good. And I good leadership good, right? Like we can't sidestep and I seeing this a lot, another controversial take. I'm seeing this a lot in a lot of these new AI companies is that it's like, okay, we are doing well. We have a lot of, great resources. We're not a big organization, but good leadership is not an emphasis, right? And I see a lot of churning of senior leaders in a lot of places, right? And I was just talking to somebody who came from a different tech company who's now anyway, so we were talking about the churn of leaders and how many leaders that person had in this organization, and it does. So I think there's like needs to be a return to fundamentals in some ways, and then kind of this growth on that. And I think this idea of developing our ICs to work smarter and really understand, kind of level up to that manager level already, right? It's like almost like they need those management level skills for this to future proof our workplace. But they're still the same core skills besides being able to build like an agentic flow, but they need these like core leadership management skills. And so I'm doing a lot of both, of like kind of grappling with the two sides of this, which is like the return to basics, but also like, how do we enhance?
Yes. Yeah. And AI being the enhancing tool. So yeah, I mean, I love this. This is, so measure once, cut twice, measure twice, cut once. And that's also a muscle that you develop. Like once you've done that a few times, it's something that it becomes natural as well. So yeah, this is great. I'm looking at the sort of notes we have for this conversation. I think we've covered everything and exactly what I wanted to get out of this. I have one more question for you, Becky, and that is, why do you do what you do?
Not sure we have enough time for that. So I think if anyone looks at my LinkedIn profile, you know that I was a teacher right out of college. I was a music teacher, but I've always had a passion for growing and developing others. And I just I think that it really makes my heart sing to be able to give people opportunity to stretch, to do things that they never thought they could do, to give people tough feedback so they can get better. Like those things really make me joyful. And if you ask anybody, anyone I've ever managed, my favorite part of my role is also being a manager, because I love the ability to really have that high touch impact and work with folks and get them to stretch and grow and learn. And so it really has all kind of come from the same thing of this love of learning and this love of growth and development. And I think all of the talent management pieces, when done really well, all fit into that narrative, right? It's all about supporting individuals to be their best in service of the business. So I love what I do. I feel very lucky to get to do it. And I'm excited for my road ahead.
Yeah, me too. And I love having guests like that on the show. So thank you for coming and sharing it. It really feels like you're in your flow, you're in your zone of genius, and I can't wait to see what you do in your next role. Thanks again, Becky.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.